Tories have never polled less than 30% in any general election previously, even under William Hague. And I say that we all love William Hague, but the Tories, I think, polled 32%. So to be hovering around 19% and that be an actual reality is it's a huge moment for that party.
Do you think that, what do you think is the net effect of this? Is it that some people say, oh, goodness me, Keir Starmer's calling Rishi Sunak a liar? Or is it, hang on a second, £2,000, it must have come from somewhere, I'm a bit worried?
So I think there are two elements to that question. Howard Davis has kind of tackled one of them, which is the history and the reason why political parties started doing this in the first place. I think the bigger one for lots of people around the country is this idea that we've sort of descended into a place where everyone just feels a bit fed up and almost a bit sort of grubby about it, actually. And I was out with Labour yesterday all day. I was at the debate, and then we went on the bus down to Portsmouth with Sir Keir Starmer for the D-Day commemorations. And the mood in that camp, they were disappointed with how the debate had gone. You know, they weren't saying that openly to journalists, but because you can feel it. You can feel that people are a bit fed up. And I actually think you got a bit of that feeling from Keir Starmer too. But I think something bigger than that happened yesterday, because the Labour leader for a long time has made a point of trying to avoid getting into this kind of politics. I almost think that's partly why he didn't engage with this £2,000 tax question in the early stages of the debate. I've got a feeling, and I don't know, nobody's been able to confirm this, that he felt that even talking about it as if it was a logical thing was a waste of time, because he just dismissed it out of hand. Now, I think politically that was probably not the right choice, but you can see the logic as the type of politician that he is. I think for him, calling the Conservative Party liars repeatedly is a step. It's a step into a place where I don't think he wanted to be. I'm not sure he's entirely comfortable, and I don't think it's good for politics, because when you have both sides just accusing each other of lying, it's really very, very difficult to navigate a path through that. The reality is all political parties in elections will produce this kind of calculation. Labour has done the same. In some ways, Labour's calculation is based on even wilder assumptions than the Conservatives, which are reasonably conservative in terms of the way they've costed these policies. But I just don't think it helps voters in any way, shape or form.
Can we talk about this one poll? And it is just one poll, but it is the latest one taken after Nigel Farage said that he would stand. And it shows a real narrowing between support for reform and support for the Conservatives.
Yeah, this is a YouGov poll. It still has Labour out on 40%, the Conservatives on 19%. Reform, though, are on 17%, and that's why it's got everybody talking. There is a change of methodology. You can go online, and YouGov has explained what they've done, and they've also recalibrated some of their previous results to show that these ones are not wildly out there, that they're not an aberration, if you like. They are logical. The reason why lots of Conservatives are very worried by this is because Reform are obviously 2 percentage points behind the Tories on 19. Interestingly, I read somewhere yesterday the Tories have never polled less than 30% in any general election previously, even under William Hague. And I say that we all love William Hague, but the Tories, I think, polled 32%. So to be hovering around 19% and that be an actual reality is it's a huge moment for that party. And lots of people considering, well, what does this mean for the future of the Tories? They know they're going to lose, but if reform can genuinely translate that into an election result, and I think that's a big question, then that 17% is absolutely huge.
Yeah. Okay, Kate, thank you very much for that. That is Kate McCann. She's Times Radio's political editor.
Freddie, first with you, are we naive to expect something better than this? Because everyone does it. Labour do it with the Tories' plans on national insurance. They get as big a number as possible and they talk about it. Tories have basically found a number as big as possible and are relying on it. Is that just politics, or are we right to demand more than this?
I do think it is politics. You know, the way they came to this number is basically how people have been doing it for campaigns for the past few decades. You know, you want to have punchy, cut through, sort of crystallized claims in a campaign, and all parties have done that. I think people are more sophisticated than they're being given credit for. I think voters expect that during a general election campaign, there will be claims and counterclaims. And of course, each party is going to take kind of worst case scenario of the others and try to bring it to life through specifics. I think most people would expect it to be just politics as normal. And when you have suddenly this, it does feel the new element here is that the word lies. As I enjoyed your little clip there, it sounded like a beginning of a rap. Lies being kind of repeated so much. I don't feel that's helpful, because all it does is it takes the anti-politics mood that really is out there in the country, and it fans the flames of it. It gives the sense to people that, all politicians are liars, and that it makes things worse. So I actually don't feel that Keir Starmer is helping in the bigger picture here.
What do you think about that, Hannah? Is it the responsibility of the person making the claim for it to be absolutely squeaky clean, or is it the responsibility of the person to whom it's directed not to call them liars about it?
I completely disagree with Freddie on this. I think it is a lie. For Claire Coutinho to come out yesterday and say this has been signed off by the Permanent Secretary to the Treasury, that was a lie. And I think Starmer has to call it out, because this £2,000 figure, which is politicking, and it's right to say that this is done by all parties at every election, but that to give it that official stance is lying. And unfortunately for the Labour Party, it's massively cut through. We're talking about it not the morning after the debate, but the next day as well. And those watching the debate were certainly won over by it. The snap poll afterwards showed a 20-point lead for Sunak when it came to tax. So I think Labour have got to come out, and I think it's these horrendous taking us back to Brexit with the amount of lying there. And I think it's the media's responsibility actually to say where things are not true and where they are true. So I disagree with Freddie on that one.
Freddie, do you buy the argument that actually a disputed number is better than a number you can stand up fully? Because you do get this. If you have a number that you can quibble around and argue around, you get 3 days of chat about it rather than 1 day of chat about it. So there's no reward for being squeaky clean. It's actually better to be down in the pigsty scuffling around, because you get more out of it.
That may well be true. I mean, Rishi Sunak hasn't got a lot of things to go on. There's not a lot he can actually attack Labour on. Tax, he might think, is one of them. And with such slim pickings, I think he should be pretty pleased with the day's media coverage since that debate, because, it's been focusing on what is definitely an awkward issue for Labour, which is that, the commitments are there for the spending, and it's not clear how it's going to be paid for. Everybody agrees, I think, that these are going to be tough times coming, and tax rises are very likely. Now, as it happens, it's kind of backfired ultimately on the Tories as well, because people are focusing on that if this is going to happen if in the event of a Labour government, will it actually also happen if the Tories win in that very likely scenario? And you've even had The Spectator, which is normally seen as a real sort of Tory in-house magazine, coming out and saying, well, if you apply the same kind of principles of logic to the Tory spending plans, and you use their same back-of-the-envelope maths, you'd actually end up with £3,000 a year of additional taxes under a Rishi Sunak plan. So, he's released a kind of monster here, and it's coming to bite him.
Freddie won't like using this term, but Hannah, I think that there's an argument that both parties are lying to us, because they won't say, we had Mel Stride followed by John Healey today, and they both won't say the finances are such, you're either going to cut public services or increase taxes. You're probably going to have to do both, but you're certainly doing one of those two things. Neither one will say that, and therefore they're both being dishonest with us, because Freddie's absolutely right. The same problems that will lead to Labour tax rises exist, A, because of the Tories, because they've been in power for 14 years, and B, would exist if the Tories were in power, and no one is being honest about that.
You're absolutely right. And that's the bigger problem here. Neither of the two main parties are being honest about the state of the nation's finances, which are pretty poor. And you've had Paul Johnson from the Institute of Fiscal Studies raise this point as well. There are only three options available to you. You put up taxes. They've said they're not going to do that. You cut services. They've said they're not going to do that. Or you borrow. And both parties have said they're not going to do that either. So it doesn't really stack up either way. And we're not getting honesty from either party, no.
And we have
Strongly agree with that.
You do agree with that, Freddie?
Yes, I do. I think
And,
there
and shouldn't they be honest? Because you talk about this sophisticated audience, which I think you're entirely right about, Freddie. But if it's a sophisticated audience, why would it not be refreshing if someone actually treated us like grown-ups with brains and actually say, here is the position? I know maybe I just sound grotesquely naive when I say that, but
no, I would like that. I completely agree with Hannah that it is almost a sort of conspiracy of silence between the two main parties on just how tough the spending and tax situation is going to be in coming years. You look back at those austerity years with Osborne and Cameron when we were arguing about decimal points on the budget, but during which borrowing rates were so low that it would have been incredibly easy to borrow money. We're not in that situation anymore. It's expensive to borrow money. The tax burden is already very high. Even after 14 years of Tory-led government, it's higher than it has been for decades. We've got a huge social care problem, which is going to be extremely expensive. Famously, the NHS backlog is enormous and very difficult to solve. Meanwhile, we have defense. Both parties are talking about the necessity to look at defense spending. It's possible that a future Trump presidency might take support for NATO downwards, which will mean pressure on defense spending is even greater. This is a kind of four-dimensional sum that just doesn't add up. And so you almost get the sense that the two main parties are more comfortable having these little spats, pretending that it's business as normal. Well, really, the macro picture just won't favour either of them.
We're going to move on now talk about the Nigel Farage effect. In the first poll since Nigel Farage announced that he'd be running to be an MP, Reform appear to be closing the gap with the Conservatives. The YouGov poll put Labour at 40%, Conservatives at 19%, and Reform just 2 percentage points behind them at 17%. Another pollster says that Survetions found that Reform could win 3 seats. So everything seems to be going in one direction, although it is just one poll. Hannah, how much of this is just the Farage effect, and it might not actually translate to election day? And how much of this do you think actually should worry people who don't want Nigel Farage in Parliament?
A bit of both, I think. I mean, Nigel Farage, love him or loathe him, he's a terrific political communicator and has had an enormous impact on the politics of our country. So these numbers should be absolutely terrifying the Conservative Party. I mean, we were talking yesterday on the New Statesman podcast with Ben Walker, who's behind Britain's Predicts, that just a 1 or 2 point move away from the Conservatives to Reform, that's 60 seats. And so you're looking at the difference between a pretty poor result for the Conservatives, kind of 1997 style, and total annihilation. They should be absolutely terrified. So, and again, he made the point that, Farage has got a really good chance in Clacton. Interestingly, he singled out another couple of seats that Reform could take as well, which were not the same as Survetions.
Oh, right.
So,
oh my goodness.
maybe 5 that they could be up for. So, and I think what would also absolutely terrify the Conservatives is that polling suggests that of the 2019 voters that voted for the Conservatives, a greater proportion now are in favour of Farage over Sunak. So it's really looking dreadful. But you can totally understand why the Conservatives are saying a vote for Reform is a vote for Labour. It certainly appears that is the case.
And yet that message, Freddie, may not get through. It's like a lot of things. It's like the £2,000 message, in that you can dispute it as much as you want, but once it's out there and it's kind of nestling in people's minds, it has an effect. And Nigel Farage and Reform, yes, voting for them may have a different effect in terms of who actually ultimately gets the votes, and it splits the votes. But if it takes even more seats away, if it does, takes more seats away from the Conservatives, first of all, is that humanly possible based on the MRP poll that we saw at the beginning of the week? This must be a big worry for them.
I mean, every time, I'm speaking as a former pollster. I used to be at YouGov, and, every time I see a new MRP or a new seat-by-seat forecast, I think, oh my gosh, could that actually happen? You see the generous ones, the ones that seem favourable to the Tories, are talking about 120 seats. And some of these other calculations, as Hannah said, go down to 60 or 50 seats. I mean, we're talking about 376 Tory MPs right now. It could be that 300 of them don't have a job in a month's time. This is truly a kind of seismic event, and you can get me back if that doesn't happen, and they actually do much better than predicted. That's of course possible, but to me, it seems like the energy here is moving to reform.
And Freddie, what kind of calculations do you think the Conservatives might be making when it comes to policies, when it comes to manifestos? Because, when they look at these kind of polls, when they look at the Farage effect?
Well, there's nothing they can do now. That's the thing, that essentially the sort of left-leaning half of Tory support is furious with them because of Brexit, because of incompetence, and they're not going to be enthusiastic or turning out in great number. And now the right-leaning half of the Tories are now casting an eye at Nigel Farage and reform, and they're furious with the Tories because they say they haven't sorted immigration. In fact, immigration has gone to historic highs during this last government, exactly the opposite of what they thought they'd voted for in 2019. So you're very hard pushed to find people who will enthusiastically defend the Tories from any part of the political spectrum. So there they are talking about change, and that it's this kind of cliche that every election needs to be a change election. And Keir Starmer says, stability is the change, which is one of those sort of paradoxes that politicians like, I suspect, voters don't really understand. Obviously, the place that the change momentum is going is towards reform. There's very few other options for them. So that seems to be the trend. And I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, if we don't see reform overtake the Tories in terms of vote share during the weeks to come.
Right. Obviously, that there's vote share, and then there's seats, the two different things. Hannah, we haven't mentioned the Lib Dems. If the Tories are busy fighting reform, what does that mean for the Lib Dems? I mean, they're already looking quite healthy. I think they're thought to perhaps be able to pick up as many as 48.
Yeah, and potentially even more. And I think it's playing into the Lib Dems' hands very nicely. And I think Ed Davey actually is the only leader so far who's looked truly human. I mean, no one could have not been moved by the film yesterday with him and his son, who he and his wife care for 24 hours a day. And really, the Liberal Democrats, Freddie touched on it earlier, are the only party talking about one of the most serious difficulties we're going to face as a country, which is social care. I mean, it was pointed out to me that we neglected to say that in Scotland there is free personal care, but it's a massive problem. Our population is ageing, and it's really quite shameful that our two largest parties are not even prepared to have a conversation about it with the public.
Yeah, and yet you know why, don't you?
Yes,
you know
of course,
why.
it's not a vote winner.
Theresa May.
Yeah, of course. The death tax.
And Kerry Bednock said we brought her on under false pretences.
Oh, leave it.
I can't get over that.
Go on, let it go.
I can probably get over it.